Welcome back to another episode of Global Pulse in 60 Seconds. I'm your host, Khizr Ahmed, and today I'm delighted to welcome Alberto Chan, co-founder of RaiseHealth. Alberto brings a rare combination of frontline consulting experience and entrepreneurial ambition to one of the most expensive and entrenched problems in American business, employer healthcare. With a background advising employees on cost-effective benefit strategies, he co-founded RaiseHealth to turn expertise that has long lived in consulting rooms into something scalable, accessible, and built for employers who are running out of runway on rising healthcare costs. Alberto, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me, Khizra. Appreciate the opportunity.
So let's start with employer healthcare. Now, you've seen that from both sides, advising organization as a consultant and now building a startup to fix what that system gets wrong sometimes. So what is the biggest blind spot you see in founders who build startup healthcare technology but struggle to get employers and HR decision makers to actually change how they operate?
That's a loaded question. Let me see if I can try to answer. So I think the premise here is, let's say, health tech startups or medical device technologies are not being able to get, let's say, good traction, even after FDA clearance, right? Their 510K PMA. Okay. So I think the first layer is clarity on the payer landscape. So majority of the time, I still hear a lot about like reimbursement codes and Medicare and like insurance coverage. So the layer here is that what we have to understand is the payer landscape in America changed. So if you look at population wise, right? Medicare, Medicaid's roughly 30 to 50 million, depends on how you count. Then you have what you call like your traditional insurance, as we understand it. We call them the BUCAs, right? Blue Cross Blue Shield, United, Cigna, Aetna. Like all these folks are what we call traditional insurance. We call it fully funded plans. Like even though your employer is paying for it most of the time, the money goes to Blue Cross, and they're what we call fully funded because the nuance is who's paying for stop loss insurance, and I'll explain later why this is so important. All right, so the risk bearing technically is through Blue Cross. This pool of members are shrinking. Today we're roughly at 50 million, and according to McKinsey, like in the next 10 years, they probably will shrink down to 30 million. So where are these folks going? So they're going to a place called self-funded plans, right? And within self-funded plans, so we have like 100 plus million members now. The whole reimbursement landscape is very unique, meaning it's kind of a sudden-headed beast. You don't know who's and who's. In a way, I'll try to like simplify. In one piece of the self-funded, you have what we call like ASO plans. So as a customer, like you still see the Blue Cross Blue Shield card, but who owns the stop loss insurance cost is actually the employer. And then you have the fully personalized health plans. So for sake of lack of a better word, let's call it TPAs, third-party administrators. So then you hire a unique company that will manage and process your claims, right? But everything in the plan design is sort of like managed by the health plan, meaning the employer, right? Obviously, the employer will hire someone else to manage, like design the plan, but you're no longer using the Cigna, Aetna, Blue Cross plan design, meaning coverages, like what can or cannot be done within that plan. So this piece, it's actually where people should start focusing more, right? I won't discuss kind of like who's right and who's wrong in politics, but at some point in American history, traditional insurance companies were forced to have what we call a ceiling in profit. And so if you look at this served as a double-edged sword. Like on paper, it looks like you're gonna keep them in check. They can't like be greedy. But humans are, like we're too creative. So now making the system inefficient actually really helps them, right? Because dollar to dollar, even though you're at that 15% cap, like if you force the market to keep inflating, right? Now you have a $1 trillion, healthcare cost. Tomorrow you got 3 trillions. Like dollar to dollar, that 15% is going to be much better, right? And so if you look at for these, fully funded plans and ASOs, like these are the what I call the challenging players in the industry. I won't call them bad players because you can't really say, who's good or who's bad. But their incentive, if you follow the money, their incentive is to keep making healthcare inefficient versus whoever's within a TPA, um, the plan has the utmost interest in actually saving lives, in actually providing better care. Because ultimately, the CFO is going to look at their P&L, is going to like, well, I don't want my healthcare to keep increasing 10, 20% every year. It doesn't make sense. And so you open that can of worms and you start to understand, okay, maybe I cannot start adopting these technologies. And there's a rule of law called ERISA. So these companies are allowed to really like design as long as it's FDA cleared, right? And so I'll stop here, make sure you understand. I know it's a lot, but in a nutshell, right? Um, I think the first layer that we all should really understand is the payer landscape.
It was a loaded question, Alberto. So thank you so much for your response. Um, in a nutshell, what the blind spot around adoption is more common than most founders want to admit, and it usually shows up earliest, not in the product, but in how they think about the business around it, particularly when it comes to funding and the habits they build, trying to secure it. Now, we both know that every health tech CEO wants a magic wand to secure funding instantly so they can get back to building. Why is that mindset actually dangerous for a startup? And what operational habits do founders need to learn instead?
I think if I can take a little step back, right, to validate your question. So if you look what's happening with the private equity and venture capital space, right? Like majority of founders will hear this kind of plain vanilla answer, right? Like, hey, love what you're doing, but you're too early for me. Come back when you're, later. And then founders are like, what the heck's going on here, right? And if you start noticing all the VCs, no matter whether like, med tech, health tech, they're all becoming, a little way like private equity, right? You have to have at least your million plus ARR, otherwise you won't even be considered. So why is this happen? In a way, it is because once you get your FDA clearance, and you go to market, 90+% of all these startups are not getting anywhere. They become zombies. And so if I take, your question in consideration now, it's not that the magical wand of like, hey, can you refer me to investor and I can go and do my own thing and I'll get the funding and everything's going to be great. Uh, he worked to a point, right? Like if you see now, most deals are really like early stage are all getting funded by angels. Like, institutionals are like coming later in the game, like, and so they're no longer playing the seed space, right? And angels are actually getting the wrong side of the bargain. So like they're not seeing any returns. So if you peel the onion here, like ultimately, I'm gonna keep beating the that horse here is if you don't know how to de-risk your business, like it's not really about your product. It's almost like the the joke that we hear when we're kids, like if you have a good product, it will sell for itself. But in healthcare, and honestly, even in tech is not, because if you see like all these softwares, the CAC is getting higher and higher, the churn rates are getting lower and lower. So um, what's happening is that like in healthcare, because everything's regulated, for you to adopt any new technology, the cost of adoption is much, much higher than, like we believe the incentive to be. So like for instance, if you have a technology that will somehow reduce bed stays in a hospital, right? Like, but how does a hospital really make money, right? By prolonging the bed stay. Like, but well, we'll reduce the infections. Well, but they do make money out of like throwing like antibiotics at you. And so like the whole way that healthcare really works is this push and pull between like, like what doctors believe, what patients want, what the system needs. And so like ultimately, that's why we always get the answer of like, hey, you're too early, is because you don't understand how to de-risk your business model, right? And so what I recommend most of the time to any early stage founder, especially soloers like a doctor, a PhD, is that go and build your kind of your advisory board first, because the cost of a startup is really like how to open doors, right? Like even if you're a doctor from like Stanford Hospital, Penn State University, like you're still a tiny fraction of what the real market is, right? And these are what we call like research university hospitals. They do not go apples to apples to what we call like rural health, like and so if you don't know like how to actually sell, well, the sales force actually care, right? Like it's like a rep, his job is to go in, take the order, and go out. He's not there to really educate the physician. And if he has to do that, that's like time that he's not billing. That means he's not making money. Therefore, he doesn't care if you have the best product. So who would care? Then you have to go to like a tier three, tier four local tiny distributor that they're dying. So they're looking for, so there's this whole dynamic of like your go to market. It probably the most important thing you do, even before you start your clinical studies. Make sense?
Absolutely. So that magic wand mindset is really a symptom of avoiding the harder operational work that actually builds a fundable company. And in a market where every deck looks the same, that discipline becomes the thing that separates founders who get meetings from those who actually get investment. And right now, every startup pitch deck says AI powered. So, how do top tier investors separate a CEO with a genuine systemic AI solution from the one who is just using, buzzwords to attract capital?
This is an interesting question. I would say like AI is really here to change. Like there's no debate about it. Like I just saw in news right now that in China they have this $15,000 robots in hotels already and taking it over. Um, so the way I look is like the cost of production, the top cost of technology in a way is cheap, right? Like you can discuss with me whether, cloud tokens are really expensive, Anthropic's making money, but still, um, I feel like technology at this point is really like the baseline, is what you call it your entry fee. But then what do you do with it, right? Let's take like EHRs. Like EHRs are the biggest headaches in America. Like Epic has this business model of like how they make money by making the EHR in America confusing. It's almost like uh, the system has to be so complicated that the idea of changing it will like break the whole thing, so no one wants to touch it. It's just not worth it, right? So if you look at AI could technically come and solve this, right? Like you don't really need like relationship databases anymore, right? You don't need to like structure anything anymore. You can literally just have a repository and let the AI do its thing. On paper, that'd be ideal. But I go back to your go-to-market. Like, how will you convince, the physician to adopt this? How you're going to convince the hospital to adopt this? And then on top of it, like, okay, I'll open another can of worms. For you to return that much money that you got funded, you have to bet on something called value-based care, right? And in America, we've been pushing value-based care. It may work on year one, but personally, I don't see it work on year two. Like if I put my CFO hat, okay, maybe this year you save me $1 million. I'm willing to pay you 500. But guess what? Next year, I don't have the $1 million budget anymore because now I'm gonna adjust for the savings I actually have now. And so then this value-based care, it's almost like this, downfall waterfall chart that, but people think is the opposite, is this uptrend waterfall chart. And so the risk reward, the financial return is not there. And so I think like most of the time, this founders, the startups are so excited about the technology itself that they forget that there's this whole piece called business in healthcare that's way more important for you to like be an expert rather than really being the expert in the AI. It's not to say that it's not important, but it's just your entry fee. Otherwise, you wouldn't be even discussing about it.
What you're just describing is essentially an investor doing pattern recognition at speed, and the founders who survive that scrutiny are the ones who have actually done the works behind the slides. And it's also changing how, those founders run their companies day to day, particularly with the tools now available to them. And my work through Health Mate focuses on helping healthcare professionals and organizations use AI responsibly, effectively, and ethically. And your perspective is on leveraging AI from the businesses and the investment side to help CEOs secure capital and scale innovation, if I get it right. So I'd really be interested in our audience to hear your perspective on how AI is transforming the day-to-day realities of building and operating a modern healthcare startup.
A healthcare startup or healthcare system?
Uh, Whichever you want to pick up.
Um, I think from a startup perspective, it's really like now the CEO it's able to do more. Like operationally speaking, like I don't know if you've been having the same conversations as I have. It's like I really feel more burned out with AI than I felt ever before. Like before, it used to take me like a week to make a decision about things. Because if I have to make, let's say I'm making a decision between what's my go-to-market strategy, right? I have to go talk to all these folks. I have to build my pitch deck. I have to hire this, marketing people and go on a roadshow and then come back, compile the data, and then figure it out. But like with AI now, you can essentially just do a deep research, wait an hour max, and review the whole thing, and then you make a decision. So like the 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 day-to-day to a CEO, it's actually getting way more loaded than it was even before. So I'm actually getting burned out because it's decisions after decisions after decisions after decisions without a break. So that's from a startup perspective. I don't know if this is good or bad. Obviously, it reduces costs, makes things faster, all these things. But I think like we as human beings became the bottleneck. And then from what we've been discussing about like what you do by helping like all the providers and the health systems to really adopt AI, I think it's like 2 points. One is like on paper, obviously it's gonna come and change healthcare as we know it. But then the second piece is what do we do with, let's put like a radiology AI. So let's say in the last 10 years, we probably have like over $6 billion in, red AI being invested by VCs. Like if you go stir the pot, which AI in mammograms, CT scans, MRIs are actually winning, right? Every single health system has their own. Like Mayo has their own, Penn has their own, MIT has their own, Stanford, Carnegie, like everyone has their own, right? Okay. But then they prove that you can help the radiology to improve, like their work. But from a provider perspective, Like I'm putting 10 plus years of my life becoming this expert in looking charts, right? I'm looking at mammograms all day, day in, day out, and I can make pretty good money. So what the startups or the system or the investors are, I think like the gap is like we're not preparing the system, the provider to understand what's their next role, right? Like me as a CEO of a startup, I know that with AI, I no longer need to do the pitch decks, the business plan, the VDR, like all that sorted out. So now I know that I'm going to focus on making the most for my company, whether it's fundraising or selling, right? And so that releases me to actually produce more. But from a provider perspective, like what is producing more? Because all they did for 10 years was like, I need to make sure that this patient is good or bad. Like it's a life and death situation. But if that's no longer the case, what's my role in it? And so that's what the resistance is like we're not preparing the system to understand like each functions what's next for them.
Absolutely. And Alberto, I agree that AI is not just changing what healthcare startups can build, it is changing how the people running them operate as well,
Yeah,
which sort of compresses what used to take a team, as you were just mentioning,
yeah.
into what one focused founder can now manage. And that raises the stakes considerably for getting the fundamentals right, I would say. So, in 60 seconds, that's our closing challenge. For the healthcare founder listening right now who is drowning in investor outreach, administrative chaos, and struggling to get the traction, what is the single most important shift they need to make today?
I'd say like there's a couple steps, but on average, this is what I've seen that works best, right? You have a great idea. Um, Make sure you understand how to sell it first. Like before you build your whole startup, hire a advisor that knows the beginning to end on that sales process. And if he had to turn the machine today, he would actually know. And not by hiring another sales rep, right? So he can take it all the way. So once that risk of go to market sort of like figure it out, then you go and start building your clinical operational kind of advisory, right? Um, Even if you're the expert in the field, like ultimately the way that clinicals will work is how many people believe in you for you to get accepted. Like it's a little bit of we're still selling faith in early stage. And even if you're like number one, the leading expert, you still need like 10, 20 people behind you saying, yeah, yes, I think Alberto's saying is like the right thing, right? Okay. That will help you capitalize another thing, which is create the bridges with investors, right? Like ultimately, investor may or not be an expert in your field, but he will want to search for someone that he believes that or that is an expert in the field. And so by association, that gives you the the networking power, the report, the pedigree, whatever you want to call it. And so that's sort of like the biggest piece. What I think every time I look at startups, they don't have figured out. They just look at the product and they forget about, like we're selling faith now. And so you need the right people behind.
That is the kind of clarity that only comes from having seen both what works and what quietly kills a promising company. Alberto, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a genuinely valuable conversation for anyone building in this space, and we will be sharing it widely on our platform. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.